tag team several weeks back, sometime back, they shared their testimony with me and what has taken place in their life. And it truly is miraculous what God did in their lives. And I knew, when I was listening to them, we were out at the pickleball court and we're standing out to the side and they're just sharing. And I mean, God's Spirit that take place, I thought, we're going to find a spot in here and we're going to combine these two. And so as we finish this small portion of the end of the chapter of 27 of Acts and the miracle that God is doing in Paul, in Luke's life, in these other prisoners' lives, in the Roman centurion and the other soldiers' lives, in the crew of the ship's lives, God is doing an incredible miracle in the end of this chapter, in this shipwreck and him saving their lives. And then I'm going to let Dwayne and Tammy come and share the incredible miracle that he has done in their life. And I dare say, if you are a believer and you're willing to look back on your life, there are many miraculous events that have happened in your life. Sometimes we just kind of gloss over, and say, oh boy, I was lucky there, or whatever the case may be, where luck didn't have anything to do with it. God had his hand on your life even before you knew him. He was ordering events and bringing you to places, and many times they're hard and painful and difficult and all sorts of things, just like Paul here in this ship that is about to fall apart. It was very difficult, and the miraculous, God's touch saves them. Well, I'll talk more on the miraculous next week as we get into chapter 28 and, why does he do it here and not here? And first of all, I'll tell you, I don't have the answer to that one completely, so I'll just go ahead and tell you that. So, because last time I checked, he's God, and I'm 27. Some of you are new with us coming into 27. So Paul has been in Caesarea for over 2 years in house arrest. And we spent a good bit of time on that segment of his life. But then that segment of his life ended, and God moves him into a new chapter of life. It's interesting how God does that. It's almost like when you look back, you can go, yeah, that kind of ended there. And it was like he started this new thing with us as we move forward. And so in Paul's time in Caesarea, it comes to an end, comes to a close. He's placed under Roman guard. And he begins a voyage to Rome. Because God has said, okay, just like you spoke to the people in Jerusalem and you shared here in Caesarea, you're headed to Rome. You're going to go talk to the emperor. And I mentioned last week, he doesn't get into who the emperor was at this time. The emperor was Nero. Nero, the guy who burned Christians as torches to light his palace. So, if God said, okay, Alan, here's the guy I'm sending you to, I'd be like, wait a minute. I'm going to talk to who? Paul is headed to Rome, and he's going to go share a message with Nero himself. He warns on the trip, God speaks to Paul, and he tells them they're stopped off at an island here. You can see out in the middle of the Mediterranean where it says Fair Havens right there. Midst of it, and I didn't write this one on this page or on this slide, but Luke writes in the account, we all lost hope of being saved. We all. Luke lost hope. Paul lost hope. They're like, well, I guess this is it. I thought we were going to go to Rome, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to make it. We all lost hope of being saved. Even these guys. They come to places in life where life gets so hard and so difficult, you're like, I don't know how this is going to work out. And quite frankly, I don't think it's going to work out. It's a very difficult time. And in verse 24, God sends a messenger, an angel, to speak to Paul. And he says, don't be afraid, Paul. Now, we hear that and we get focused on, gosh, he saw an angel. He heard an angel. instead of what was the message. Okay? God just sent a messenger to speak to Paul. The messenger is not the point. The message was the point. Don't be afraid, Paul. So what was Paul being at this point? He was afraid. To the guys on the ship, and he says, this angel spoke to me, and he says, we're going to run aground on some island. I don't know what island. I don't know where we're going to land. I don't know what it is. I don't know where. And I thought about this as I'm preparing all this, and I apologize. My brain, I don't know, it's kind of different, So anyway, so I'm thinking about them. They're in the Mediterranean. This storm is hitting, and God's going to run them into this mountain. And I thought of me at the water park in the lazy river, okay? Like I said, my brain thinks a little different. Have you ever been on one of those inner tubes and you're floating along and you got to get off at this place, and it's like you can't even get off over there? It's like the current's carrying you past, and you miss, and you're like, I got to go all the way back around until I get back to this thing. And I know that sounds kind of dumb, but I'm thinking about how intentional God was in the midst of this storm, in the midst of the Mediterranean storm, Mediterranean Sea. He runs them into the island. That's my point. It's not happenstance. Oh, well, we just happened to run upon an island. Well, it's because he happens to have a God who's moving them to it. He's in charge, even when we don't see it. Even when it's so big and it's so terrifying, we have no idea how he's going to work this out. How many times and you don't have to raise your hand on this one. How many times have you prayed to God, I don't know how you're going to do this. I don't know how you're going to fix this. Really? We can sit here in church in our air conditioning. We have water and bathrooms and everything. We can go, yeah, I know God's got it all. But then there's those moments where you're like, God, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe you're in an emergency room at the hospital, or maybe you're in a bedroom watching a loved one pass or about to pass, or maybe you are at an accident, or maybe your job scenario, or whatever. I don't know. But I know I've been at places where I'm like, I don't know how you're going to fix this. I don't know how you're going to do it, God. Now, that's not logical, and we can sit here and you can pat me on the shoulder and go, now, God's God, and all that. But when you're dying, you're dying. And that's where even Paul was. And he tells them, I don't know, we're going to run into some island, out here in the middle of nowhere. So we get into where the storm was raging. That's where we're picking up in verse 39. I kind of closed with these last two verses here last week. He says, when daylight came, they did not recognize the land. And I think that's pretty telling too, because a lot of times when God begins to provide for us and he begins to bring us out of the storm, we're in new territory. It is, or what's going to be there, or how it's going to play out, or who it's going to entail, or whatever, and we come upon this land we don't recognize. Now we can go, oh, a new adventure. Well, I'm not always that good at being that hopeful. I'm just not. We're not sure what's going to be on there. What's going to be on this new island, and what's this going to entail, and so forth. So they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach. So at least there's hope. There's land. They've been going over 2 weeks without eating in this horrific storm, not knowing if they're going to live or die, coming to the place where they think they're going to die. And it says where they decided to run the ship aground if they could, they cut loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind, and they made for the beach. All right, so this right here is a certain act of faith, quite frankly. You've got the crew, you got the Roman soldiers, you got the prisoner, and they're like, okay, he's been telling us that we're going to find land. We're going to come up ashore on this land. And so they cut the anchors. They're getting rid of all the things that would prevent them. And they're all in now for getting to that land. Okay? Now, I think this is kind of like how life is too. okay? So maybe we're in this difficult place and we're struggling and we're trying and God speaks to us and we're like, okay, here I go. Let's go. All right? And look what happens next. Here they go. They're on it. And it says, but the ship got stuck in a sandbar. That's kind of how life goes. I don't know that I ever really noticed it quite like that before. All right, God, here we go. Everybody ready? Let's go. And we get stuck. And land's over there. And we're over here. And then we go, I thought you were saying whatever it was I thought you were saying, and here we're stuck. And we still got problems. It's kind of how life is, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're stuck. They ran aground and would not move. And the stern was broken to sure, here we go. We're cutting anchors and we're making for land. Boop. And now the ship's getting beat up. We're going to drown out here. We can see the land, but we can't get there. That's even worse. Why did he even give us hope if we're going to hope and then not get there? That right there is one of Satan's main tactics that he uses. When we first take that step of faith, and then he comes with that next blow and takes your wind away. Oh, you thought there was hope. You just saw it. See, we build these barriers up of not having hope, not getting out there because, I've been disappointed so many times. I can tell you that's happened in relationships. I have and have had. Don't put yourself out there. They'll just burn you again. The key is doing what God says. Done. That's it. That is it. And my hopes may get punctured because I find out maybe I had my hope in the wrong thing. I wasn't hoping in him. I was hoping for what response I wanted or circumstances to happen or the way I had it figured out. When I feel like God says something to me, it's amazing how I take that and go, of how that's going to look like for the rest of my life. And it rarely ends up that way, quite frankly. And in retrospect, I can look back and go, I'm glad he didn't do it the way I thought that was going to happen. Because, boy, would I have made a mess of it. He knows. He knows what he's got for us. He knows, in spite of us, what's right. He knows what we need, even when we don't have a clue that we don't know. He has it. And so here they are, stuck on a rock. Just, I don't know, it doesn't say exactly how far. It was close enough where they could swim or float to it. But it's far enough where it's pretty dangerous. So we move forward to the next step. Okay, so we're stuck on this rock and the waves are breaking up the boat. Well, let's add in another element of difficulty. How about that? That's another thing about life. Oh, okay. Well, now we got to deal with this too. Yeah, the Roman soldiers. Oh, yeah, there, The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping. Now, let's look at it from their viewpoint. Okay, so you just don't think they're bloodthirsty and awful and horrific people. They're entrusted with those prisoners, and their lives are tied to the prisoners' lives. And if the prisoners get away, and these are big-time prisoners because they're going to see Nero, if they get away, they're going to be killed. They're going to be put to death. So they are panicking. We're going to hold on to what God's word was. God told Paul, do not be of truth. They can't both be right. So how's this going to work? Well, what's amazing is how God's word never changes. He says to us in Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Was I right on that? Were you, was that, that was an angel, right? And that's going through your brain. It's being tested. Here's what I would say, because if I'm just going to share things that we all go through. There's times you go, oh, well, I thought God said this, but it must not have been God. And then we just kind of flitter around, and we're like, James refers to, he says, we're like tossed around in the sea. He says, when you ask for wisdom, believe you've received it. Because if you don't, it's just like you're tossed around in the sea. You don't know what to do. And it seems so complicated. I'm just going to cut to the chase on this of what God has taught me, okay? Do what he has told you to do until he tells you different, okay? Now, that doesn't mean that I always hear right, but I got to hear him tell me, this is what I want you to do now, okay? Then I will change course. Otherwise, I don't know. I don't know what all this is about. I don't know how to do any of this. I pray to God. I don't know if it was him or me or, I don't know. And in order to be confident and to grow in our confidence, this whole nother sermon, is spend time in his word so that you are dialed in to what he is saying. So heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will last forever. Okay, 42 and 43, it says that the centurion, Julius, the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life. You see, God has worked on Julius. No, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And he kept them from carrying out their plan, and he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. Now, we just read that like, oh, yeah. They just jumped over and swam. You ever swam in the ocean? You ever swam in the ocean when there's a hurricane storm? You ever floated on a plank in the ocean? We're talking about a dire situation here. Every step of the way has been difficult. But he tells them, he spares them from the sword. And we see in the last verse of chapter 27, in this way, everyone reached land safely. God did what he said. He did what he said. Now, I'm like, why did we have to do it so hard? Why couldn't you just, do like he did with Philip, in earlier part of Acts where it says, and God translated him to another place. Just, put us over there. Why does he make it hard? Because he's growing us in our ability to trust him. And he allows us to be in vulnerable positions on purpose so that we see him move. And it confirms in us, oh, he's real. And this is how I can tell you, this is my story. This is what he did in me. There's power in that testimony. You see in Revelation 12:11, it says that the enemy, Satan, is defeated by the blood of the Lamb. And then God endowed your testimony. Satan is defeated by the blood of the Lamb and the word of the testimony of the saints. That is amazing that he let us be a part. We talk about, spiritual warfare and fighting the heavenlies and stuff like that gets talked about in church. And the best way to do it is to tell your story. There's power in that God has given. And so I am going to now ask Mr. Dwayne to come up and share the amazing story that God has done in he and Tammy's life. So with that, come on up. This is on, and if you need it moved up, here's the controller. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you. Come on up.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here today to share a story that's changed our lives for Tammy and I both. I'm going to raise it up just a bit. Not that tall. Okay, good. So there's a miracle here sitting amongst us today. She's right there. And I think when I finish telling our story, you'll understand why I say that, and you'll agree. Tammy'd be up here telling the story herself, except for two things. She gets really nervous speaking in public in a crowd. That's probably number one. Number two, she slept through most of the story in a coma. So I'm the designated hitter to deliver the message. There's really three people involved in this story as far as key actors and key players. Of course, Tammy. She's the one that suffered the problem. Our daughter, you'll hear more about her role she played in it, and me. And those are the three people that really have the first-hand knowledge of the story. And while our daughter's not here, I brought some of her written testimony to read to you. So you're going to hear from all the first-hand players today. And at the end of the message, just like a political ad, I think Tammy's going to say she approves this message. So think back in time. It was a little over 7.5 years ago, on February the 17th, 2017. And we used to say work had taken us to Washington, but looking back, we realized God had ordered our steps and guided us there. And it was a rainy, cold, wet Friday afternoon. I was working from home, upstairs in my office, oblivious to the world downstairs. And Tammy, on a lark or led by the Spirit or who knows what, decides, in spite of the weather that she hated, got out on that cold, snowy, rainy day, calls our daughter that lives 45 minutes to an hour away up towards the Cascade Mountains. We were in the Seattle area in Washington State, and says, hey, let's go shopping at the outlet stores near your house. What? Okay, great, let's go. And they load up, Tammy loads up, drives out there in my four-wheel drive vehicle to be able to get there because the weather was that bad, crazy. And she picks up my daughter and our two granddaughters, Peggy 7, and the four of them go to the Washington, just before you get to Snoqualmie Pass to go over the Cascades to the other side. So that was really weather out there that day. And they get to the outlet mall and they do their thing, and on a Friday afternoon, if you've ever been around any metropolitan area, what happens? Traffic kicks in. And especially early in the afternoon as people are taking off because it's Friday. Let's get an early start. And normally, they've done this a time or two before, usually when the weather's better, they split and go their separate ways before it gets too late and traffic gets bad. But this day, Tammy says these fateful words that saved her life. I think I've got one more story in me. And they extended their shopping. And so they go into this additional store. And, you know, had she stayed home that day or had she not extended her time to be there with my daughter, this would have had a very different outcome. They were checking out, and Tammy went rigid and fell over like a tree onto the tile floor with sudden cardiac arrest, which, if you know anything about that term, is also referred to as sudden cardiac death. It's not a heart attack. There's no blood pumping. The heart's quivering super fast. There's some life in it, but nothing's working. And she went down, completely unconscious. Some people that were in the store reported thinking that a shelf had broken and all the merchandise and the shelf itself crashed onto the floor. It was that loud when she hit the floor. In that circumstance, it's not uncommon for a broken neck or a concussion to occur. By the grace of God, neither of those happened to Tammy. Some of the store clerks said, don't they'd just be having a seizure. Our daughter, Satin, like a ribbon, Satin said she's recognized death. She knew she wasn't having a seizure. Hallelujah, she'd had CPR training 3 years prior, but in 3 years you forget things, and in the heat of the moment, nerves kick in, excitement, whatever, and she wasn't sure what to do. A year after the event, on the anniversary of that cardiac arrest, she wrote these words to us, reflecting back on that day. That day my world stopped, and I called out the name of my God, the one true living God. I screamed, Jesus! Screaming out the name Jesus, I saw death tremble and be defeated. Not in the way that I'd hoped. She didn't rise up then and there, but something told me, and I knew if her heart started again, that was God's promise to me that she would come back to me in full recovery. Her heart had to start again. And the only way that was happening was through faith. When death was staring me in the face in the form of my beloved mother, looking me straight in the eyes with her lifeless eyes, my best friend, my mom, the only thing I could do was to tell death no. I screamed no, not an irrational yell, but almost a command, like I was proclaiming a promise that Jesus can conquer death. I knew the only thing more powerful than death was my Jesus. I cried out to Jesus, my Jesus. The two little granddaughters, Peyton and Tally, were standing off to the side. They were shouting, Mama, Mama, is Great Mama, they called her, is Great Mama dead? Why? What's happening? And our daughter is normally, at least back then, shy, sometimes a meek individual. But the Holy Spirit came on her and empowered her to shift into command and control. She started holding church there in that store. She started the CPR, unsure of exactly what to do, admittedly made some mistakes, but then she felt a heavy weight of the angel on her, pressing her hands down with firm enough strength to get the compressions that were needed. She also gave breaths and alternated back and forth. And in between all this, where she's pretty busy and had her hands full, she's telling, go call 911. And then she told another clerk, watch my girls, but keep them here where I can see them. And miraculously received a word of knowledge with complete certainty to be able to tell the clerk to go outside and get the nurse. Did not say go look for a nurse. Go get the nurse outside. How would she know there was a nurse there? Why would there even be a nurse there? This is a little teeny tiny country town with a little shopping center. But the bewildered clerk did as she was told and returned with the nurse. Then, I'm going to lose track of the miracles. I'll challenge you to keep count. Sat and told her, go get the other nurse. And she did. So now then, finally, with two nurses, she was relieved of the CPR duties as they took over. This excitement and hoopla was going on for 6.5 minutes before first responders got there. That was a long time. The North Bend Fire Department normally doesn't have paramedics on call, on staff at the fire station there. At best, they've got their EMTs, but they were shorthanded that day. And so they had called in advance, as God had prepared a way, to the big city of Bellevue, almost an hour west of there. Could you send over some people to cover for us in this afternoon shift? And they sent two paramedics, Tony Hightower and Doug Milligan, that are trained by the Medic One Foundation, the leading premier paramedic training program in the entire world. the first ever in the United States. And tell you something else about Washington State. There are not very many Christians out there. It is the lowest percentage church attendance in the United States. Those two paramedics are both Christians. And they were the first ones there. Instead of coming from 2 miles away or more, however far it was, clear across town with traffic and so forth from the fire station, they had been assigned the job of running to the grocery store across the highway to pick up some supplies. Or they'd have been a lot slower getting there. When they got there, they worked on Tammy for 25 additional minutes trying to get a pulse. They had to shock her 4 times. A total of 31 and a half minutes, my wife did not have a pulse. Told you there was miracles there. She's sitting there with us. During this time, when things kind of slowed down and the 2 nurses relieved my daughter from duties, I got that phone call that changed my life, 2:35 in the afternoon on a Friday. She started easing the story in and says, Mom collapsed. I'm thinking she fainted. She got lightheaded, low blood sugar. It was a lot worse. She began to explain the rest of it to me, and I raced to get to North Bend as fast as I could, but it was 45 minutes away normally without even the Friday traffic, and I was caught in it. It was stressful, to say the least. When they got that pulse after 31 and a half minutes, a fire chief found our daughter and told her, we've got a pulse, we're about to transport Tammy. We're not sure where we're taking her. Satin was elated, and she says, praise the Lord, my mother's going to live, because she'd heard God's promise already. But the chief cautioned her that they had little hope, that they had seen many situations like this that didn't turn out well. Later we learned that a crowd of about 15 responders had ultimately showed up during that half hour of work. Policemen, firemen, EMTs, and paramedics. They were around her in a crowd, pushing medicines, doing everything, trying their best. Great technology, great capabilities. I'll leave it up to you to make your own conclusions. I start rushing to the wrong direction. I get another phone call, reroute, go to Overlake Hospital. They passed a closer hospital, but those paramedics, being from Bellevue, knew that the leading cardiac care facility in the state of Washington was a further hospital in Bellevue, and that's where they took her. The head of invasive cardiac surgery, the #1 cardiologist at Overlake, Dr. Joseph Doucette, closed practice. He writes medical textbooks to train cardiologists, the best of the best in his field. But he just happened to be on call at the emergency room that day. And thus he became Tammy's doctor. God had ordained every step of the day. By the time I got the call to reroute, I was in gridlock traffic on I-90. I'm flashing my lights, I'm honking, I'm trying to get people to let me through, and didn't succeed. The ambulance passes by on a frontage road, and I know she's in it. It about broke my heart because I was afraid I wasn't going to get there in time to say goodbye. My son and a man from church were both waiting at the hospital when I got there. They prayed quickly while I scribbled my name on a couple of pieces of paper so they'd let me back into the emergency room to go find Tammy, dead or alive. I saw, at least I thought, that white corpse of a naked figure there bleeding at the mouth. At least Tammy's not going to be that bad off. And then we turned and it was Tammy, and I couldn't even recognize her. From there, she was taken to ICU, and she remained there with 12 IVs hooked up to her, multiple monitors, and in a coma. There was nothing more I could do to help her except to pray. And I didn't trust my own prayers enough. So I thought, well, I better recruit some help. And that became my mission for the next several hours, to get the word out to family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, fellow church members, employers, business associations, anyone and everyone I thought knew how to pray, anybody that believed. I was sending the word out. My phone battery was down, but by then our daughter had arrived and brought me Tammy's phone, and I went through her phone book, and I was just getting the word out and putting her name on prayer list after prayer chain after prayer chain. Later that night, the nursing staff confronted me at the hospital and said, Mr. Dunk, we need you to provide us with all these papers on health directives and various things that were pointing towards an eventual death, and asking me if I had things in order and wills and you name it. I rebuked them. I refused to sign anything and told them that it wouldn't be necessary. And chemically induced at that point to make sure she stayed out. Paralyzing drugs, sedatives, and everything else while they put her in hypothermia to try to protect her brain, fearful that she was already suffering severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation. They said, Mr. Duck, there is nothing more you can do here. It is going to be a long haul. You should go home and get some rest. And if you have to have somebody with her, leave a family member, because you've got a long road ahead. So reluctantly, I left and went home that night, the only night I was away from her. She came out of the coma on the third day, on that Sunday. She awoke, frightened, scared. She perceived it to be a dark room, though it wasn't. She really had no vision. She couldn't speak, couldn't even swallow, couldn't move. It was in intense pain and agony. And more fear embraced her than she'd ever experienced in her life. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know what had happened. She wondered if she was dead. She even wondered if she was in hell. Tammy has given her testimony over and over again, and she always tells them this part. That was the worst moment of her entire life. And the worst moment of her life on earth is better than anyone's best moment in hell. She was taken off the respirator later that same day. Unbelievable. The anesthesiologist that made that decision was another Christian. Only a few hours after stopping 4 sedating, pain-killing, and paralyzing drugs, a lot to get out of her system, the anesthesiologist taking the ventilator out of her, or actually leaving it in but cutting it off, had originally planned to just dial it down to partial assist, and he ended up seeing that she was doing so well, he went ahead and cut it off. Unassisted, breathing on her own, unexpectedly, every nurse and respiratory therapist waiting in the hall were astounded, and I watched them literally jumping and dancing and shouting for joy in the hallway. And they weren't even all our nurses. They were rejoicing that she could breathe on her own. So many people were dying up and down the hallway every day in that ICU unit. And here was life in Tammy, unexpected. And they were celebrating and rejoicing even in a secular hospital. For the next few days, Tammy couldn't sit up, walk, talk, or even swallow. They tried giving her an ice chip so that if it did lodge in her throat, it'd melt before she choked. She couldn't, and she failed that test. She couldn't fully communicate. She was largely unresponsive. The medical team told me and our family, it's time to prepare for the long haul. Likely she's going to be in the hospital for 6 to 8 weeks. She was in ICU then. It seemed reasonable. She'd be in inpatient therapy after that for another 12 weeks, and then outpatient rehabilitation for 12 months. About a year and a half to get her back to whatever her new normal might be if there was not too much brain damage. It was time to call in reinforcements to help sit with Tammy at the hospital. As soon as Danny Jackson, that a lot of you know, Tammy's older brother, got word of the need, he ran out the door, hooked up his fifth wheel trailer, told Debbie they were leaving in an hour and a half. Get ready, I'm leaving with or without you. And the two of them drove virtually round the clock in February with a winter storm over the Rockies and got there in 2 days. Thousands of miles. They were fantastic. I bonded with them like you can't imagine. They came in our hour of need. Tammy's younger sister Jackie flew in as well. The hospital staff provided sitters at night. Even though I was there or some other family member was there 24/7, we never left Tammy alone. What was her real role? Tammy couldn't sleep. She was hurting. She was in pain. She was so restless. And with her tossing and turning and hurting, they were worried she was going to pull out some of these mini IVs all over her. And the sitter was basically there just to hold her down, which Tammy didn't appreciate. But towards the end of this rough week, one sitter, an older Christian Hispanic woman, watching late night television in the room on a Christian broadcast, leaned over, looked at Tammy and said, I see in your eyes that you and I both believe the same thing. Tuesday night, the fifth night, they gave Tammy a dose, a very low dose, of Ativan to see if that would help her rest. The side effects were nightmares and horrendous hallucinations the next day. I spoke with her doctor about it, and as a result, the following night, the nurses were instructed to not give her any Ativan unless they felt absolutely necessary to try to help her get some rest, and only in the lowest dosage necessary. But parenthetically, it said up to a dosage of 4 times what she'd had the night before. When the night shift nurse came in, moving a little too quick and a little too fast, she saw the 2 milligram dosage and gave her the entire maximum 4 times what she'd had the night before. I panicked knowing what was likely to happen and really worrying about Tammy, what she was going to suffer again. But God had everything under control. No nightmares, no more hallucinations. And the next morning was the 7th morning that from then on the whole family that in our household knows is Miracle Thursday. Miracle Thursday started with Tammy being pretty well rested. And I walked up close to her bed, and she reached up and says, "You've got a fuzzy on your sweater." She could swallow, talk, complete sentences, sit up, and even walk without a walker. She had more energy and color to look at least 10 times better than the day before. But that wasn't my assessment. Dr. Doucette said she made 10-fold improvement in that one day. The 8th day, Friday, she got 10 times better again, 100-fold better than she had been. They moved her out of ICU. They had to. She had already walked over 2 miles a day in the hallways as measured on her Fitbit while carrying her walker they insisted that she have with her. She didn't qualify for ICU anymore. Saturday, in the cardiac care unit, Doucette responded that she was 10 times better again, or 1,000-fold improvement than 3 days before, and that was his professional medical assessment. She was assigned occupational therapists to come help her learn to talk and do simple physical activities, and they wanted her to stack quarters and move the stack and do manual dexterity training and things like that. She was so far beyond that. She ignored them, left them waiting in her hospital for walks around the hallway carrying her walker. The critical care staff, according to Doucette, had never before witnessed such a dramatic and rapid turnaround. No one in the hospital had ever seen such detailed memory up to the final seconds of sudden cardiac arrest. Usually there's a period of, fog and blackout that just gets wiped from the memory before and after. Not the case with her. The lead cardiologist said, "It's surprising, but I am no longer surprised by anything regarding Tammy's recovery." He summed it up well when he said her rate of recovery exceeded the staff's ability to keep up with her. On the 13th day, Tammy came home straight from cardiac care, bypassing a regular hospital room or any rehab. None was needed. I could never begin to thank everyone that was providing encouragement and prayers at that time. God certainly answered them. It was abundantly evident. The number of people praying, literally, as we added up all the prayer lists and chains and churches and so forth and began to look at the responses from the emails coming in, was in the thousands that were praying for her. It was staggering. I think she came pretty close to the definition of going viral. And it just points to how many lives she had positively touched. On her second day home from the hospital, 2 weeks after the cardiac arrest, she was cut loose to walk basically as far as she wanted to. And she was had been walking 2 to 4 miles a day in the hospital when they finally sent her home. Danny and Debbie stayed a month with us in Washington, had their RV parked in an adjacent community because our neighborhood wouldn't allow it. They paid seriously for that parking privilege without complaint. Danny stayed up with Tammy every night when she couldn't sleep, was restless, having to sit up in a recliner, helping her with whatever she needed, no matter how humbling or embarrassing that might be for Tammy. And Debbie took her every day to the gym to help her with her strengthening and getting stronger and exercising and supervising her that she didn't overdo it. 8 months later, in October of 2017, Tammy ran her first half marathon. Our daughter wrote that letter I mentioned on the first anniversary of the cardiac arrest. She ended quoting Matthew 17:20. "If you have faith of a mustard seed, nothing will be impossible for you." I treasured that letter. I carried it around in my Bible, but I couldn't figure out exactly where to put it until the day I was reading Romans 4:18 through 21, where it talks about Abraham and him trusting in faith God's promise to him, not wavering in his faith because his body was as good as dead because he was about 100 years old. So I rewrote that in the February 17th, 2017 paraphrased version and stuck it in the phone cover on the back of my phone, which I showed to Alan. And it says in the revised version, "In hope, Satin, our daughter, believed against hope that she would witness Tammy's resurrection to life as she had been told. Tammy will be restored to health. She did not weaken in faith when she considered Tammy's body, which is as good as dead since she collapsed from sudden cardiac arrest with no pulse for 31 minutes. No unbelief made her waver concerning the promise of God, fully convinced that God was able to do what he had promised." Just as Alan's been teaching in Acts 27, verse 25, that you kind of skimmed over today, says, "So keep courage, men, for I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me." More judiciously, but I mean everyone heard it. And I've had the opportunity to share this testimony witnessing for Jesus with atheists, non-believers, Muslims, and Hindus in huge numbers across India, thanks to my work contacts that I was doing in water treatment in developing countries. It's a story that's gone global. People that wouldn't expect to be able to share the gospel with, but this event has enabled that. It was a tough trial for us to get through back in 2017, 7.5 years ago. But I'm reminded of a couple of scriptures I want to close with. Genesis 50:20, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. And Romans 8:28, and we know that all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Neither Tammy and I will ever be the same again. We've been blessed beyond measure and beyond anything we deserve. It's not us, it's God. And I pray that this will touch lives and that you'll never be the same again as well. Thank you, Alan, for this opportunity to share today.
I told you it's pretty powerful. Amazing. We serve a mighty God. You know, I think it's, when we say God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, but then we go, but he doesn't do miracles, what are we even saying? We're contradicting ourselves. God is who he is. He just is who he is. He is the great I am. He could do things back then, and he does things now, and he'll do things moving forward. That's just who he is. And that we don't always understand how and where and why was Tammy's life that day spared and another's he takes to him? I don't know. He's God. He had more work for Tammy to do. I know that. I mean, they call her, Jana and Beth, they call her the Energizer Bunny out there at the pickleball court. That girl, she runs around like nobody's business. She is always going. And you see the life of Jesus in her. That is awesome. It's to his glory. That's what it's about. It's to whatever happens, it is to his glory. And we can wrap our mind around it or not. But it's not going to change the fact that it's all to his glory. And we can be thankful for that. And I think, for us, we also need to make sure that we don't go, well, I don't have anything maybe as dramatic. God getting you up today is dramatic. That we have breath in our lungs today, that is dramatic. The life itself is a miracle. It's a miracle. It's amazing what he has done. It is amazing what he's done. And so I pray that today stirs in you a thankfulness, a recognition of the fact that God's in control of your life. He is in control of your life. I won't tell the whole story, but there was a time where me and our kids, we could have died. Me and my two children, we could have died. And after it was over, I just prayed, God, why did you do that? And I heard him say, it wasn't your time. I heard him say that. It wasn't your time. It could have been, but it wasn't our time. Not that day. That's the opportunity that each of us live with today. God, you've given me today. Help me live for you. Help me testify about for that testimony. We appreciate